Hello and welcome back to another video. My name is Brandon Watts, and today we're going to be talking about a question that I get asked often, and that is over how to shoot and light a large room or open floor plan such as this image that we have here today. Now, the beauty about the flash ambient technique I've been showing you for the past couple of months, combined with what I'm about to show you, turns practically each and every house into the same thing. You'll never really truly have to worry about where you'll be placing your flash pops because they'll be the same almost every time, no matter the house. What do I mean by this? Well, let's take a look at this floor plan I created so that we can visualize things a little bit more clearer. So whenever you walk into a large open floor plan like this and you have your composition set up, the first thing you're going to want to do is break down the image into individual spaces rather than looking at it as one large space you have to light. And if we do that on this floor plan, it's going to look like we have our living room, our dining room, our kitchen, our hallway light, as well as our stairway that we all have to light up. Now, before you say, Brandon, if we have to light these spaces over and over again, that it's going to take forever, I want you to know that it only took me 41 minutes to light this 3-bedroom, 2.5 bath, and deliver 36 images, 28 of them being interior shots. And the next step becomes having to light each space so that we can blend all the spaces together into one image. Now, how do we do that? Well, it's extremely simple. So looking at this image, you can see I placed these grid lines on here to mimic our rule of thirds. Mostly every camera should have this in their settings to be able to turn that on as a display overlay. For mine, for the Sony a7S III, I use a rule of thirds with a diagonal line attached to it, though we don't need those diagonal lines for the purposes of what we're doing today. The first thing I'm going to do is going to merge my ambient layers into a HDR ambient file. This is my 2 stops over, my 2 stops under 3 exposure bracket merged into one layer. I'll turn this into a 50/50 luminosity blend, and we can go ahead and disable that since we don't need it right now. Now, the very first flash pop I'm going to do is just going to be a basic flash pop that you learn from all the other YouTube videos. You just pop it above the camera facing backwards and tilt it up so that way you light up this interior space here. You can see that I'm not trying to overblow anything with the amount of light that I'm popping into this living room space. This wall right here is close to the flash, so it does get a little bit more light than the rest of this living room. The fact that it doesn't reach all the way back here to the dining room and kitchen is okay because we're going to light those separately. I'll go and turn this into my darken repair. Boom, I'll disable that. Now all we have to do is worry about our side-to-side flash pops. So looking at this first right side flash pop, you can see that this overexposed white blob that comes from just popping all this flash into this wall in order to light up this half of the room, this half of the image. I'm trying to contain that flash blob on this half, this right half of the image. So that way when I go into my left side, I do the same thing to where I try and contain this overexposed blob on the left hand side of this halfway mark. Or what I like to do is use this fan right here as well as my halfway mark. So as long as this blob is contained and doesn't start to cross over into the halfway point, what I can do is add a white layer mask, hit G on the keyboard, make sure that I am on a black to transparent gradient. We have a black foreground with a white background. And what I will do is just ahead of this flash blob, I'll hold down Shift, I will click and drag over to the other half of the image. Oh, sorry. Make sure that you're not onto your radial gradient. You want a linear gradient. So I will Control Z, hold down Shift, click, drag, and there you are right there. So if I disable these grid lines, you can see a little more clearer that with that mask, I'm effectively merging myself out of both sides of this living room space. Now I can reactivate my darken color repair. And for all the other images below that group, below that first side-to-side group of images, you'll bring that up above the darken color repair. I'll reactivate my grid lines. And now you can see that instead of using this halfway mark to split this dining room, I'm now using this left third line, or what I'm really using is this light right here as my halfway point to split this dining room in half. So as long as I contain this flash blob on the halfway mark or on the right side of where I'm lighting, and I'm not getting that flash blob crossing over into that space that I'm trying to fill, and I do that for the opposite side, this flash blob is contained on the left hand side of this light. Now what I can do is hit it with my action, my gradient action, hit G on the keyboard, and I'll just go ahead and bring that gradient right on over to kind of mask myself out. There we are there. I'll go ahead and hold down Shift, click both of these images, do a Control G to group them. This is going to be my dining room. I'll hit this with a screen, and now we can disable that. And if I take off the grid line so we can see a little bit more clearer, for this kitchen, I ended up taking 2 shots. You can see that inside of this little archway, you can see that I'm actually poking out around the side of that wall. So what I would do is hit that with a mask, B for brush, make sure that it is black foreground still on a white mask. I'll just go ahead and brush myself out. I'll go ahead and group those two together. This is my kitchen. Hit that with a screen, and that's good to go. Now we can see that I'm trying to light this hallway shot, but this flash pop didn't quite work out, so I took a second one, and you can see how that blends in a little bit nicer. Let me zoom in. You can see that that flash pop is blended a little bit more evenly compared to this. You do not want that. That is a completely wasted shot, and I would not use that. So let's go ahead and just delete it. And we use this flash pop in which I stood about 5 feet further from this archway here, so that way that light kind of faded into this wall rather than being so close and overpowering. Now we'll hit this with a screen. Let me zoom out with a Control 0. I will hit this stairway shot with a screen. Let's go ahead and reactivate our kitchen, our dining, and our ambient blend. And you can see now that everything is blended a little bit better, but it is still a little bit too bright. And that brightness is coming from the dining room group. So what I like to do is, let's see what happens if we move it to lighten. The lighting isn't that great because you can see that there's some discoloration in here on the ceiling. There's also some discoloration between the dining and the living room blends, in which this seems to be a little bit more paler and this one seems to be a little bit more orangey yellow. So if I hit that back with a screen for the dining room, you can see that blends in a little bit better, but it's still too bright. So all we have to do is drop the opacity to taste. And for this one, I'd say maybe about 50%. You can see what happens if I bring it all the way down. That space is not really lit that well. If I bring it all the way back up, it's overly lit, but around 50% looks like a nice blend. That's basically how you want to light an open floor plan or a long hallway, is just going and breaking up the image into multiple spaces for you to light, and then setting those spaces into its own group and hitting it with a screen. But let's go and fit some issues that arose from using some of these flash pops, like inside of this kitchen. You can see that, I think it's yep, this one right here, there is this flash glare and discoloration that's coming up in here. So let's go ahead and select with a W for a quick select. I'm gonna hold down Alt to subtract what I don't need. There we are there. And I'll go onto this mask, hit B for brush, and let's just go ahead and brush that out. But now it appears slightly too dark. So let's go into this ambient blend and this 50% color layer that I have right here. Let's go ahead and do a Control Shift D to reactivate our selection. We'll switch our foreground color to white. If you hit X for X-ray, you can switch your colors that way. So we want a white foreground on a black mask. Let's go ahead and just brush back some color from this ambient, which it looks like it's not really doing too much. Let's check that ambient file. The ambient isn't really that orange. or that bright. So let's go back into this 50% color. We'll do a Control Shift A. Actually, let's do a Control D to deselect. Then we'll do a Control Shift A to bring up our camera raw. Let's just go ahead and pop that exposure up a little bit. Bring in some vibrance. And now you can see the difference on there. If I do a Control, or let's do a Control Z, that's without it. Let me zoom in. That's without that extra color pop, and that's with it. It's a little bit of a subtle change, but I like to use it in case my flash pops get a little too crazy. All I will have to do is just blend out that glare that's there, mask it out, and then re-add color from the ambient layer if it looks like the color isn't looking too correct. Now let's go back up to our ambient blend. We'll close this. Now, one thing you're going to notice is that when you're adding all of these extra flash pops to the overall image, if I go ahead and just group these and I disable all of them, you can see that by turning it off and on, it adds this extra brightness to the overall image. Now, if I was just turning this image into a agent for a basic house, which I did, I would just turn it in just like this, maybe make some very minor adjustments inside of camera raw. But if I wanted to go a little bit deeper with this, I can actually start to separate each space into its own, so that way it doesn't affect the entirety of the image. You can see that these lights inside of these highlights are slightly blown, so we'll get more of those details back by doing so. Let's go ahead and hit M for marquee. We're on the dining room right here. If I do Alt and I click on this little eyeball right there, let's see, it's set to 53%. Oh, to lower the opacity. I'm gonna bring it right back up to 100%. Hit Alt and click that little eyeball to isolate the group that we're working on. Hold or push M for marquee. Click and drag a wide space around that area. I'll do a Shift F6, and I will want to feather the selection by around 100 to 200 pixels. The smaller your selection, the smaller you want to feather it. The wider your selection, I tend to want to feather it a little bit more. So for this wide of a selection, I'm actually going to go with about 200 pixels for a feather. Hit OK. Then I'll come down and hit it with a mask. And now you can see that we're only starting to blend in that part of the group. Let's go ahead and turn on our kitchen. We'll do the same thing. I'm going to do M for marquee, make a selection around that area. For a selection this small, I'll do a Shift F6 and hit it with about 100 pixel feather. Turn that into a mask. And now you can see how we're starting to affect the image. Just repeat these steps. Again, I don't normally do this for every image. I only do this if I want to go a little bit higher end, because it is additional steps that don't really matter unless you're being paid to care. Unless you're being paid extra to care. Boom. Now we can turn back on our ambient. Make sure that when we do so, open up that group. Because we hit the Alt and hit that eyeball, it disabled all of the images inside of that group. So we want to turn those back on. Same with the darken color repair, turn those back on. Make sure that these are turned on, those are turned on, those are good. Let's lower the opacity back on that dining room to 50%. Now you can see if I disable all these masks, how bright the image becomes as every group starts to affect the entirety of the image, compared to if I re-enable all of these masks. You can see how it doesn't affect the entirety of the image as much. It only affects the parts that they are isolated to. Now, when you look at these lights, since each group isn't affecting all of the image, look at how I disable these and how these highlights are affected. They're slightly blown out a little bit, not too much, because I shoot at I shoot at a shutter speed of 1/250 to really bring my highlights into place. But if I re-enable those isolations to where they're not affecting all of it, you can see now that those bulbs are kind of brought back a little bit more so. And it looks nicer in my opinion. Same thing with these windows. You can see how all those groups affect the brightness of these windows compared to when I disable them. Now there's another issue with this window right here. It's kind of green. It's a slight tint of green in there, and that's not natural. If I were to hit Alt and the little eyeball right there, you can see that on my darken color repair there is this flash reflection, this glare that's popping up into this part of the window. So holding down Alt and clicking that eyeball re-enables it all again. I'll do a Control-0 to zoom extents, open up this group, and for this color layer, what I would do is, let's do P for pen, and we'll make a quick selection this way, so that way it looks a little bit more nicer. Do a Control-Shift-Enter to close out that selection, and now we can do a Alt and hit it with a layer mask, and that will automatically fill that selection with black. So if I disable and re-enable, you can see the difference between that color, how that color looks nicer compared to before, looks a little green. And another tip is, if for whatever reason the agent tells you, oh, can I see through the windows, whereas before you didn't do any flash pops to do your window pulls, well, all you have to do is just go into your ambient blend, hit it with a mask, and now if I do a Control-Shift-D to re-enable that selection, I'll hit B for brush, X to switch my colors to black foreground, and I'll start to just brush out that ambient. Because it's the ambient, if I show you the ambient, you see how it's faded? You're not able to see all the way through as much. So that ambient blend is affecting how this image right here is exposing over the flash pops. If we get rid of that ambient, now we're only exposing for what our shutter speed was at in terms of those windows. Since I was at 1/250 and this was a cloudy day, it's a little bit too dark for that shutter speed. Maybe 1/100 would have worked a little bit better, but I was not trying to do any window pulls for this agent, so I left it just like this. I'll do a Control-Shift-Alt-E to merge all visible, Control-Shift-A, camera roll. We'll go ahead and close out this image, hit it with an auto, bring up the exposure just a tad bit. Oh, maybe not. Let's actually just bring that down a little bit. Highlights are decent. Shadows are decent. I think that's okay. So if you have any questions, feel free to drop a comment below. I always appreciate a thumbs up. Thank you to all my subscribers. I certainly appreciate each and every one of you. I hope you all take care and have a great day.